My name is Claire, I'm 29, and for as long as I can remember, I've lived in my younger brother Matt's shadow. Some people say that being the eldest makes you the one who shines, the one who sets the bar. Not in my family. In our house, being the eldest meant I was the sturdy frame on which everything else leaned, the one who carried the weight so Matt could be the center of attention. We grew up in Milwaukee, in a neighborhood of neat lawns and block parties, where everyone assumed we were the picture of normal. My dad, Richard, worked in construction management. My mom, Helen, kept books for a local dentist. On the surface, hard-working parents, 2 kids, the American dream. But under that thin surface, the script was clear. Matt's feelings came first. My needs, if they existed at all, were negotiable. When Matt was in 2nd grade, he came home clutching a Most Improved Reader certificate, his face lit with pride. Helen clapped like he'd won a Pulitzer, Richard beamed, and the certificate went right onto the fridge where every guest could see it. That same year, I won 1st place at the district science fair. I came home with a ribbon and a plaque, brimming with excitement. Helen glanced up from helping Matt with his Lego set and said, "That's wonderful, Claire," before turning right back to him. My plaque ended up on a dusty shelf in my room. No fridge space for me. That's how it always went. When I turned 16, I bought myself a battered Honda with money I'd saved from bagging groceries and babysitting. It was noisy, it sputtered, but it was mine. When Matt turned 16, Richard and Helen surprised him with a shiny Jeep, complete with a bow. He hadn't saved a dime. I told myself I didn't care, but lying in bed that night, I couldn't ignore the truth. Effort got me scraps, his entitlement got him gifts. Even our bedrooms told the story. Mine stayed the same pale yellow from when we'd first moved in. When I asked if I could repaint, Helen waved me off. "You don't care about things like that, Claire. You're practical." Meanwhile, Matt's room was redecorated every couple of years. New paint, new furniture, LED lights, the gaming chair he wanted so badly. He lived like royalty, while I was told to wear practicality like a badge of honor. By high school, I had stopped expecting fairness. If Matt forgot his homework, Helen drove it to school for him. If I forgot mine, Richard scolded me for being careless. If Matt sulked, Helen coddled him. If I complained, I was too dramatic. That phrase, too dramatic, became my gag order. It taught me to swallow resentment, to keep quiet. So I buried myself in work. I studied, worked shifts at a grocery store, and scraped together scholarships. I graduated near the top of my class and went to Madison for a design program. I worked 2 jobs to cover what the scholarship didn't. Matt drifted in and out of community college, quitting majors like outfits. Richard and Helen paid for every change without hesitation. One Thanksgiving during my junior year, I dragged myself home after 50 hours of shifts layered on top of classes. At dinner, Richard asked how school was going. I barely began to explain I was on track to graduate early when Matt cut in to announce he was thinking of maybe majoring in business. The rest of the night was devoted to his vague idea. My concrete progress vanished into the background. It became a pattern carved so deep it felt permanent. If Matt forgot something, we rushed to fix it. If I succeeded, it was brushed off because Claire doesn't need recognition, she's capable. When I landed my first salaried job at a design firm, I invited the family over for dinner in my new apartment. I cleaned, cooked, set the table, even splurged on a bottle of wine. They showed up 45 minutes late because Matt had needed to stop at the mall. They walked in talking about his new jacket. That night, the only thing anyone complimented was what he was wearing. Not my cooking, not my apartment, not my job. Him. Always him. For years, I convinced myself that maybe things would change once Matt and I were both adults. Maybe Richard and Helen would start to see me, too. But patterns don't soften with age, they calcify. Even at 29, I found myself bracing for disappointment, hoping for scraps of recognition that never came. That was my life in Matt's shadow, silent, steady, endlessly giving way. Until Boston. When Richard first suggested a family trip to Boston, I almost believed it might be different. He called it a chance to spend time together, just the four of us, like we used to. A long weekend, nothing extravagant, sightseeing, maybe a harbor walk, some good meals. On paper, it sounded normal. Harmless, even. But I knew better. In our family, nothing ever stayed neutral for long. Somehow, everything bent toward Matt. The planning started with small things. Helen called me one evening, her voice lilting with excitement. "You know, we could use this trip to celebrate Matt's fresh start. He's really turning things around at work." By fresh start, she meant that Matt had held on to a marketing job for 6 months after quitting 2 others in less than a year. Meanwhile, I'd been grinding at my design firm for years, managing clients, building campaigns. Nobody had ever suggested a trip for my stability. Still, I told myself I could handle it. I stayed late at the office, clearing deadlines, arranging project handoffs. I drafted detailed notes for my team, scheduled posts in advance, even created a contingency plan in case a client panicked while I was away. By the time I shut down my computer, my desk was spotless, my inbox under control. I had earned those 3 days. Matt, of course, did nothing. When I texted him about what time he was leaving for the airport, he replied, "Not sure yet, prob last min lol." That was Matt in a nutshell. No effort, no plan, just the certainty that someone else would smooth things over. The morning of the trip, I boarded my flight with a coffee sweating in my hand, Milwaukee's gray sky vanishing below. By the time we landed in Boston, the city greeted me with sharp air tinged with salt from the harbor. From the window of the cab, I watched pastel row houses slide past, their shutters neat, their brick facades glowing in the winter sun. For a moment, I let myself hope. Maybe this trip could actually be about the city, about family, about something other than Matt. I checked into the hotel near Copley Square alone, my room waiting exactly as I'd reserved it. The lobby smelled faintly of citrus and disinfectant, the kind of generic luxury that promised comfort but no warmth. I texted the family group chat, "I'm here. Checking in now." Helen replied instantly with 3 heart emojis. Matt sent, "Save me a spot." They arrived hours later, sweeping into the lobby like a familiar storm. Richard moved with impatience, irritated at the line. Helen looked around wide-eyed at the chandeliers. Matt trailed behind, one hand on his suitcase, the other glued to his phone, barely glancing up as he gave me a quick hug. "Where are the keys?" he asked immediately. "Keys?" "The rental car. I'll drive us around." "You hate city driving." I blinked. "Matt, you didn't even bring your license." He shrugged. "So? Nobody checks. It's just easier if I drive." Before I could answer, Richard cut in with his clipped tone. "Come on, Claire. Hand him the keys. Don't make this a thing." That was the script. Matt wanted something, Richard backed him, Helen smoothed the edges, and I disappeared. But this time, I didn't give in. No. I rented the car in my name. I'll drive. Matt laughed like I'd made a joke. "Don't be ridiculous. You drive like a grandma. I'll make it fun." "Fun isn't the point," I said, sharper now. "If anything happens, it's on me." Richard's eyes narrowed. "Stop making this difficult. He just wants to feel included. Give him the keys." That word, included, burned in my chest. As if Matt were some fragile child who couldn't sit in the passenger seat. As if my role was always to step aside, to hand over what I'd earned. I clenched the keys in my fist and felt the cool bite of metal. A voice inside me whispered, "Not this time." Later that night, over dinner in the North End, I realized how easily the patterns bled into everything. Richard asked how work was going, but before I finished answering, Matt interrupted to talk about his big ideas for a side hustle. Helen leaned in, eyes shining, peppering him with questions as if he were a prodigy. I sat back, my pasta cooling in front of me, wondering why I had expected anything else. That was the rhythm of the trip's first day, my efforts invisible, Matt's whims magnified. Still, I had something they didn't know about. Something that wasn't theirs to take. Tucked inside my purse was an envelope with 2 tickets. Coldplay at Gillette Stadium. I had bought them months ago, the night I found out the tour would stop in Boston. It was my gift to myself, my one bright point in a trip I knew would otherwise revolve around Matt. The thought of it kept me steady that night as I walked back to the hotel. The city hummed with traffic and neon. My parents fussed over Matt, asking if he was too cold, too tired, too hungry. I walked a step behind, my hand brushing the edge of the envelope in my bag. For once, I had something that was mine. The second day in Boston followed the script I knew by heart. We spent the morning trudging along the Freedom Trail, Richard reciting facts he half remembered from a travel guide, Helen gushing over every colonial brick, and Matt dragging his feet but still somehow managing to be the gravitational center of attention. If he sighed, we slowed down. If he wanted a snack, we stopped. If I spoke up, the conversation slid away like water on glass. By late afternoon, we returned to the hotel to change before dinner. I had spent the walk back rehearsing how I might bring up the concert, lightly, casually, as if it weren't the one thing I'd been clinging to. My tickets were tucked safely in the envelope inside my bag. Just thinking about them gave me a secret thrill. For once, I had carved out something that belonged only to me. Dinner was in a busy restaurant near Quincy Market, a place Richard had picked because, they say, the chowder's famous. The air smelled of butter and garlic, and the din of other diners wrapped around us. We settled into a booth, menus sticking slightly to the table. I waited until drinks were ordered before sliding the envelope halfway out of my purse. "So, I got tickets," I said, my voice careful, casual. "Coldplay. Tomorrow night at Gillette." Helen's face brightened in surprise. "Oh, Claire, really?" Matt didn't even let her finish. He leaned forward, eyes gleaming. "Perfect. I'll take those." I froze. "Excuse me? You don't even like crowds," he said, grinning like it was already settled. "Besides, I've got a buddy here who'd love it. It'd be way more fun if I went." I let out a short, incredulous laugh. "I bought these months ago. With my own money." He waved a dismissive hand. "So? I'll enjoy it more. You can do something else." Helen reached across the table and patted Matt's arm, her smile soft, coaxing. "He's right, Claire. You're not really a concert person. You've always been more serious. Let your brother have this, it'll mean a lot to him." Something inside me cracked. I shook my head, gripping the envelope tighter. "No. I bought them for me. I'm going." Matt's grin twisted into a smirk. "God, you're so uptight. It's just a concert." "It's not just a concert," I snapped, heat rising in my chest. "It's mine." Helen's expression hardened. She leaned forward, her hand darting toward the envelope. "Claire, don't ruin this trip. Just give them to him." Her fingers grazed mine, nails scraping the edge of the envelope. Shock jolted through me. My mother, the eternal peacemaker, was trying to rip it from my hand like I was a child hoarding candy. I yanked my hand back, the paper crumpling in my fist. My voice came out louder than I intended, trembling but sharp. "No. Not this time." The clatter of dishes and low buzz of conversation filled the pause that followed. At our table, silence spread like a stain. Matt scoffed and leaned back. "Jesus, you're so dramatic." Richard sighed heavily, as if I were an inconvenience. "Claire, it's just tickets. Don't make a scene." Helen's face had gone pale, her hand hovering in midair. "Why are you being so cruel? You know how sensitive your brother is." I laughed, but it wasn't amusement, it was disbelief, years of swallowed resentment bubbling over. "Sensitive? He bulldozes through every single thing, and you let him." I bend, and bend, and nobody notices what it costs me. But I'm done. Helen's eyes widened, filling with hurt. Sweetheart, please, don't talk like that. Matt leaned in, smirking. It's always about you playing the victim. I turned toward him, the words spilling faster than my fear could catch them. It's never just about this one thing, Matt. It's every time I've had to give something up so you could have more. Every time my achievements didn't matter because yours had to shine. Every time Mom and Dad called me strong so they didn't have to take care of me. It's all of it. The words hung in the air, heavy and unfamiliar. I'd never spoken them out loud. Richard shifted uncomfortably, his jaw tight. Helen dabbed at her eyes with a napkin. Matt rolled his eyes and muttered, "Drama queen." But for once, I didn't shrink. I slid the envelope back into my purse, the tickets safe inside, and stood. The scrape of the booth against the floor made nearby diners glance over. My hands shook, but my voice was steady. If respect isn't part of this trip, then neither am I. I left cash for my half of the meal on the table and stepped out into the night. Boston air hit me sharp and cool, smelling faintly of the harbor. My pulse thundered in my ears, but beneath the fear, something steadier burned, clarity. For the first time in my life, I hadn't folded. The next evening, I took the train out of the city alone. The ride to Foxborough stretched longer than I expected, the suburbs peeling past in blurs of winter gray. My heart raced with every mile, not just from anticipation but from the echo of last night's fight. My mother's fingers scraping against mine, her voice sharp with guilt, Matt's mocking smirk, those images had clung to me like burrs. But tonight wasn't theirs. Tonight was mine. Gillette Stadium loomed huge against the darkening sky, its steel beams glowing under floodlights. Crowds streamed toward the gates, bundled in coats and scarves, clutching merch bags, buzzing with energy. For once, I wasn't dreading the crowd. I was part of it. I scanned my ticket, stepped inside, and let myself be carried forward. Every attendee was handed a thin wristband on the way in. Mine lit up as I pulled it over my sleeve, the band pulsing white in rhythm with the stadium lights. Inside, the sheer scale of the play stunned me, tens of thousands of people filling the seats, the field a sea of neon anticipation. Music thumped faintly over the speakers, bass rolling in my chest like thunder before a storm. I found my seat high up but with a clear view of the stage. As the lights dimmed, a roar rose from the crowd, swelling so huge it felt alive. Then, in an instant, the stadium plunged into darkness. My wristband blinked to life in sync with everyone else's, waves of pink and blue sweeping across the arena like a heartbeat. And then, music. The first chords exploded, drums pounding, and Coldplay burst onto the stage in a riot of color. Confetti cannons shot streams into the air, and the crowd erupted into song. My throat caught at first, but then the words tumbled out of me, swept up in the chorus. For once, I wasn't quiet, wasn't careful. I was loud, anonymous, and free. Guilt tried to creep in at the edges, Helen's wounded eyes, Richard's sigh, Matt's mocking tone. But the music drowned it out. My pulse matched the beat, my chest opening with something I hadn't let myself feel in years, joy. Halfway through the set, the screens above the stage lit with something unexpected, the kiss cam. At first, the camera landed on couples laughing, hiding their faces, or obliging the crowd with a quick peck. Then it cut to a middle-aged man in a suit and a woman beside him, both stiff at first. The crowd hooped. After a hesitation, the man pulled her into an embrace, and the stadium roared. But whispers rippled through the seats. Someone nearby said, "That's Andy Byron, the astronomer CEO. That's not his wife." Another voice murmured, "Isn't that his HR exec?" The screens flickered, the embrace replayed in slow motion, the crowd half cheering, half laughing. On stage, Chris Martin quipped lightly, "Either they're having an affair, or they're just really shy." The audience erupted with laughter, some cheers, some gasps. I found myself laughing too, loud, unrestrained. Not at them exactly, but at the absurdity of it all. Secrets, exposed under stadium lights. Private truths dragged into the open, unable to stay hidden. And suddenly, the parallel hit me like the bass line. I had been hiding my truth my whole life. Swallowing it, smoothing it over, letting Matt's needs take priority. Pretending it didn't matter that my parents erased me. But truth, like that kiss cam, had a way of breaking out. The band launched into another anthem, and I sang until my voice cracked. My wristband flashed in waves of yellow and green, confetti stuck to my hair, tears stung my eyes. Not from sadness, but from release. For the first time in years, I felt like I belonged to myself. By the encore, the crowd had become one voice, one movement. Strangers swayed with arms linked, fireworks bursting above. I tilted my face upward, breathing in smoke and sound, and let go of every whisper that told me I was selfish, dramatic, ungrateful. None of it mattered here. When the last notes faded, the stadium glowed with lingering light, like embers after a fire. People filed out buzzing, some clutching hands, others singing snatches of lyrics. I walked among them with confetti still clinging to my jacket, adrenaline buzzing in my veins. Outside, the night air was sharp and cold. The parking lot shimmered with red taillights, lines of cars inching out. I slid into the rental car, the engine humming under my hand, and looked at the road stretching away from Boston. I didn't want to go back to the hotel. Not to Helen's guilt, Richard's sighs, Matt's mockery. Not to the script. I shifted the car into drive, merged into the stream of headlights, and let the city fall behind me. The road unspooled ahead, dark and unknown, and for once, that felt like freedom. The hum of the rental car engine felt steadier than my pulse as I pulled out of the Gillette Stadium lot. Streams of cars crept along in glowing lines, red taillights pulsing like veins feeding back into the city. Most of them were heading toward Boston, toward hotels and families and responsibilities waiting in the dark. I turned the wheel the other way. The highway stretched open before me, blacktop shining faintly under street lamps, then fading into the darker stretches where only my headlights carved out a path. My GPS kept insisting I take the exit back toward the city. I ignored it, the voice chirping, rerouting, again and again until finally I shut it off. I didn't need a plan. I only needed a way. Music still rang in my ears, my voice hoarse from singing. Bits of confetti clung to my jacket, littered the passenger seat like tiny reminders that something had shifted. The fight at dinner still burned in my mind, but it didn't weigh me down now. For once, it felt like proof that I had refused to disappear. Boston's glow dimmed behind me. Signs for Cape Cod flickered past, green and reflective in my headlights. The thought of the ocean pulled me forward. I hadn't seen the Atlantic in years, but tonight it felt like the right destination, endless, untamed, indifferent to my family's script. As the miles rolled on, silence pressed in. My phone buzzed on the console, first a text from Helen, "Where are you? Please don't do this." Then one from Richard, "You're being selfish. Come back." Matt didn't bother with words, just sent a string of laughing emojis. I turned the phone face down, the screen glowing faintly against the seat before it faded. Their voices had dictated my every move for decades. Tonight, I wasn't listening. The road narrowed as I neared the Cape, street lamps giving way to stretches of pine-shadowed dark. Gas stations closed for the night glowed faintly at intersections. My headlights caught the flash of deer eyes before they vanished into the trees. The air grew sharper through the vents, salty with a tang I hadn't smelled since childhood vacations. By the time I reached Provincetown, it was well past midnight. The streets were quiet, storefronts dark, the harbor silver under the moon. I parked along the edge of a narrow lane and killed the engine. For a moment, silence roared in my ears louder than the concert had, the kind of silence that isn't empty but vast. I stepped out, the wind whipping my hair, cold biting my cheeks. The ocean stretched before me, black and infinite, the waves breaking steady against the shore. I walked down to the sand, boots sinking slightly, and stood there until the chill numbed my fingers. Each crash of the surf felt like an answer, steady and ancient. Nobody here cared if Matt got more attention. Nobody here measured my worth against his whims. The ocean didn't ask me to step aside. It didn't expect me to be strong so someone else could be fragile. It just was, endless and indifferent, and somehow that felt like mercy. After a long while, I turned back toward the cluster of inns along the street. A vacancy sign glowed faintly at a weathered building facing the harbor. I slipped inside, the lobby dim and warm, wood-paneled walls lined with old photographs of ships. The woman at the desk looked up sleepily as I asked for a room. "Just for yourself," she asked as she slid a key across the counter. The words caught me. Just for myself. "Yes," I said softly. "Just for me." The room was small but clean, with a quilted bedspread and a window cracked open to the sea air. I dropped onto the bed fully dressed, listening to the waves beyond the glass. The tickets were still tucked safely in my bag on the chair. My throat ached from singing, my eyes stung from exhaustion, but for the first time in years, I felt light. I thought of the fight, of Helen's hand grabbing at mine, of Richard's sigh, of Matt's mocking grin. And then I thought of the concert, of thousands of voices rising as one, of confetti raining down, of laughter rippling through the stadium when secrets were exposed on the big screen. The world hadn't ended when the truth came out. It had gone on, messy, loud, alive. I pulled the blanket over myself and closed my eyes. Tomorrow, I didn't know what I'd do. But tonight, I was here. Just me. Just for myself. And for the first time, that was enough. The inn's dining room smelled of coffee and something sweet when I came down the next morning. Sunlight poured through wide windows overlooking the harbor, gilding the tables in pale gold. The place was small, only a handful of guests scattered around, couples murmuring over toast, an older man reading the paper with his glasses low on his nose. The kind of quiet I'd been craving for years. I carried a plate of eggs and fruit to a corner table and sat where I could see the water. Fishing boats rocked gently in the marina, gulls dipping and crying overhead. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't bracing for Matt's voice cutting me off, or Helen's questions only half listened to, or Richard's sighs. It was just me, my food, and the steady rhythm of waves outside. I was halfway through my coffee when a woman in her 40s approached the empty chair across from me. She had auburn hair pulled back in a loose braid, and her eyes carried the softness of someone who had been through storms and learned not to fear them. "Mind if I sit?" she asked, lifting her mug. "Go ahead," I said. My voice still sounded raw from the concert, but I didn't care. She slid into the chair and glanced at me with an almost conspiratorial smile. "You have that look," she said. I blinked. "What look?" "The look of someone who's running from something." She sipped her coffee, her tone light, not judgmental. "I recognize it. Been there myself." I hesitated, then gave a small shrug. "Maybe I am." She stuck out her hand. "Julia. Claire." For a moment, we just drank our coffee in silence, the comfortable kind that didn't demand anything. Then Julia leaned back, her gaze drifting toward the harbor. "I came here last year after my divorce. Thought I'd only stay a weekend. Ended up here nearly a month." Her openness surprised me. "That long?" "Yeah. Turns out when your whole life has been about keeping someone else happy, it takes a while to remember who you are when you finally stop." The words hit me with a force I hadn't expected. I studied her face, the lines etched there, the calmness in her expression. She wasn't trying to impress anyone, wasn't apologizing for taking up space. She was just herself. I let out a shaky laugh. "That sounds familiar." Julia tilted her head, her eyes sharp but kind. "Family?" "Yeah." I stared down at my plate. "My brother, mostly. But my parents too. They've always," I searched for the right words, "expected me to give in. To step aside. To be the strong one so he can be the fragile one." Julia nodded slowly, like she'd already guessed. "And you've been doing it so long it feels normal." "Yes." The admission felt like uncorking a bottle I'd been holding shut for years. And last night, for the first time, I didn't. I said no. Her smile widened, not in amusement but in recognition. That's why you're glowing, she said softly. That's why you look terrified too. I laughed again, but this time it cracked into something closer to tears. Exactly. Julia leaned forward, her voice steady. Here's the thing about boundaries. They're not requests. They're rules. They only work if you keep them. If you bend them every time someone pushes, they're not boundaries at all. They're suggestions. And people like your brother? They don't respect suggestions. Her words settled into me like stones dropping into water. I thought of Helen's hand grabbing at the tickets, Richard's dismissive sigh, Matt's mocking grin. I had spent my whole life treating boundaries like fragile lines in sand, easy to redraw whenever someone complained. They're rules, I repeated softly. Julia nodded. And the first time you hold them, it feels awful. You'll be called selfish, dramatic, cruel. But the truth? You've been carrying everyone else's load for so long that even setting it down for a second looks like betrayal to them. Her voice softened. You're not betraying them, Claire. You're saving yourself. I sat there, staring out at the harbor, the sunlight bouncing off the waves. Something inside me shifted, small, but real. For years, I had been waiting for my parents to see me, for Matt to change, for fairness to arrive like a late train. But maybe the point wasn't to wait. Maybe the point was to stop handing over the tickets, literal or otherwise. Julia drained the last of her coffee and stood. Anyway, she said, her smile light again. That's my unsolicited wisdom for the day. Take it or leave it. Thank you, I said, my voice steadier now. She gave me a small nod before walking back toward her room, leaving me with my half-finished breakfast and a head buzzing with thoughts. I looked down at my hands resting on the table, then at the harbor beyond. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel invisible. I felt seen. Not by my family, not by Matt, but by someone who understood. And maybe, I thought, that was enough to start. The days blurred in the best possible way. For once, there were no deadlines, no meetings, no calls vibrating in my pocket demanding I solve someone else's problem. The only clock I followed was the tide, the steady rise and fall that seemed to breathe for me when I forgot how. Morning started with coffee in the inn's dining room, the smell of fresh muffins mingling with salt air drifting in through the open windows. Sometimes Julia joined me, sometimes not. Our conversations, when they happened, never felt forced. She never pressed for details, never demanded more than I was ready to give. It was enough that she'd nod knowingly when I admitted I'd ignored another string of texts from my parents, or that I didn't know what I wanted next. Afternoons I spent walking the coastal trails. The path wound through pines and opened suddenly to cliffs where the ocean stretched endless and silver. I'd sit on rocks warmed by the sun, sketchbook balanced on my knees, letting lines spill onto paper with no pressure for them to be good. The sound of waves and gulls was constant, like background music for rediscovery. At first, it was awkward. My mind kept circling back to the fight in Boston, to Helen's desperate reach for the tickets, to Richard's sigh, to Matt's smirk. Years of habit had trained me to replay those scenes until I convinced myself I was wrong. But slowly, as the days passed, the voices grew quieter. The ocean drowned them out. One afternoon, I hiked to a dune overlooking the harbor. I lay back in the sand, the winter sun weak but steady on my face, and let myself think about the years I'd lost. Times I'd dimmed myself so Matt could shine. Times I'd taken on work so no one else had to. Times I'd swallowed anger until it burned holes in me. What struck me most wasn't just the injustice, it was the emptiness that followed. I had spent so long shaping myself around other people's needs that I barely knew what I liked anymore. What kind of music did I love besides the safe, background playlists I used at work? What colors did I actually want in my apartment, if it wasn't about being practical? What kind of life would I build if I wasn't always adjusting for Matt? I didn't have answers. But for once, the questions felt exciting instead of terrifying. Back at the inn, I filled page after page in my journal. I wrote down memories, resentments, but also small joys. The way the air smelled sharper near the docks, the bright shock of a red buoy bobbing against gray water, the laughter of strangers passing on the street. I drew them too, messy sketches of gulls and lighthouses, my hand clumsy at first, then freer. Julia passed by one evening as I sat in the lounge, pen moving furiously. She smiled, pausing at the doorway. "Feels good, doesn't it? To make space just for yourself." I nodded, unable to put into words the strange mix of grief and relief I felt. Grief for the years I'd lost. Relief that they didn't have to keep defining me. Nights were the hardest. Alone in my small room, the waves muffled through the window, I'd feel the old guilt trying to creep back in. Helen's voice played in my head, "You're cruel. You know how sensitive your brother is. Richard's, don't make a scene. Matt's, drama queen." But then I'd remember Julia's words, "Boundaries aren't requests, they're rules." I'd picture my mother's hand grabbing for the tickets, and my own hand pulling away. That moment had been terrifying, yes, but also clarifying. I had survived it. The world hadn't ended. By the fourth day, I noticed something small but undeniable. I was standing taller. My shoulders didn't ache from hunching. My laugh came easier, sharper, uncoiled from the tightness in my chest. Even the way I walked felt different, like I wasn't apologizing for taking up space. On my last morning, I woke before dawn and walked to the shoreline. The beach was empty, the sky streaked with pale pink and orange. I stood barefoot in the sand, the water icy as it lapped at my toes. The horizon stretched endless, and for the first time, I didn't feel dwarfed by it. I felt matched. I whispered it out loud, just to hear it in the air, "I'm not going back to the way it was." The waves rolled in like an answer, erasing my footprints but leaving the vow intact. As I turned back toward the inn, the day beginning to stir around me, I realized something simple but profound. I didn't need my parents' validation, or Matt's approval, or anyone's permission to exist fully. The only person I needed to believe me was me. And for the first time, I almost did. By the time I drove back into Boston, I felt different. Not fixed, not unshakable, but sturdier, like a tree with roots that had finally found bedrock after years of shifting soil. The car hummed as the skyline rose, steel and glass against the late afternoon sky. My phone buzzed with messages from Helen, the most recent one short and pleading, "Please come to dinner. Just one meal, Claire. For the family. For the family." The old Claire would have folded instantly. Would have walked into the restaurant already rehearsing apologies, already prepared to smooth everything over. But I wasn't her anymore, not completely. I wasn't ready to burn bridges, but I also wasn't ready to hand over the tickets again, literally or otherwise. The restaurant was dim and loud, one of those trendy places near the seaport where menus were printed on brown paper and the walls were lined with exposed brick. They were already seated when I arrived. Richard sat stiffly at the head of the table, Helen beside him, Matt sprawled across from them with a beer in hand. His smirk appeared the moment he saw me, like he'd been waiting to pounce. "Well, look who decided to join us," he said, leaning back in his chair. "Drama queen herself." Helen shushed him quickly, her eyes darting to me. "Claire, honey, I'm so glad you came. Let's just enjoy a nice dinner together, okay? No more fighting." I sat down slowly, my bag at my side, and folded my hands in my lap. "That depends on what you mean by fighting." Richard sighed, already weary. "For God's sake, Claire, don't start. Can't you just let it go? It was only tickets." My jaw tightened, but my voice came out calm. "It was never just tickets. And you all know that." The table went still. A waiter approached to take drink orders, and the moment stretched, heavy with unsaid things. After he left, I looked straight at my parents. "It's about everything," I said. "It's about a lifetime of being told to step aside. About Matt being celebrated for the bare minimum while my work was expected, invisible. About being told I'm strong so you don't have to take care of me. About never being allowed to want something without being told to give it up for him. Helen's face pinched, her hand trembling around her napkin. Claire, please. I shook my head. No, Mom. Not this time. Boundaries aren't requests. They're rules. And I'm done living without them. Matt rolled his eyes dramatically, muttering, "My God, here we go again. You love playing the victim." I turned to him, my voice sharp but even. "No, Matt. I love finally telling the truth. You've had everything handed to you, and you still act like it's not enough. But it's not my job to give you more. Not anymore." His smirk faltered, just for a second, before he scoffed and looked away. Richard rubbed his temples, clearly uncomfortable. "Claire, you don't understand how hard it is being a parent. We just wanted to support him." "And you did," I said. "At my expense. Every single time. But I'm telling you now, I won't play that role anymore. If you want me in this family, then you respect me. Not just the scraps of me you find convenient. All of me." Silence settled again, broken only by the clatter of plates at other tables. Helen's eyes filled with tears, her lips parting like she might beg me again. But she didn't. For the first time, nobody rushed in to smooth things over, nobody demanded I apologize. My words just sat there, undeniable, shaping the space between us. The waiter returned with drinks, breaking the tension with a bright smile. I took mine, sipped slowly, and let the silence stand. I didn't need to fill it. The meal itself passed awkwardly. Conversation stumbled, forced. Matt sulked, Helen fussed with her silverware, Richard stared at the tablecloth. I didn't try to fix it. I ate my food, steady, letting the discomfort sit where it belonged, with them. By the time we left the restaurant, the night air was cool and damp, fog curling in from the harbor. Helen touched my arm tentatively before we parted ways. "Claire," she whispered, her voice cracking. We'll try." I met her eyes, searching for sincerity. I wasn't sure yet if she meant it, but I nodded. "That's all I need. Try." Walking back alone through the city streets, I felt lighter. Not because everything was resolved, it wasn't, but because I had finally said the words that had lived inside me for years. I hadn't folded. I hadn't apologized. I had set the rule. And whether they chose to honor it or not, I knew one thing with certainty, I would. The days after that dinner felt oddly quiet. Not peaceful, more like the silence after an earthquake, when everyone is still waiting to see which buildings will stand and which will crumble. I stayed in Boston 2 more days, walking the harbor, visiting museums on my own. My phone buzzed occasionally with short, stilted messages from Helen. "We're at Faneuil Hall if you want to meet," or "Matt's still upset but he'll come around." I didn't answer right away, sometimes not at all. For once, I let them feel the absence of my automatic yes. When I finally met Richard alone in the hotel lobby before checkout, he surprised me. He sat heavily in one of the leather chairs, his hands clasped together, staring at the floor. For a long moment, he didn't speak, and I wondered if he'd even acknowledge me. Then he sighed. "I shouldn't have told you to hand over those tickets," he muttered, his voice low. "And your mother shouldn't have tried to grab them. That was wrong." I blinked, caught off guard. Richard never apologized. His authority was usually unquestionable, his word final. Hearing even that small admission cracked something in the armor I'd been staring at my whole life. "Thank you," I said carefully, not filling the silence with excuses for him, not rushing to soothe. He nodded once, still not meeting my eyes. But it was enough to know he had felt the shift. Helen's cracks showed differently. On the flight back to Milwaukee, she leaned toward me across the aisle, her voice tentative. "How's your job going, Claire? You've never really told us much about it." The question was so simple, so ordinary, that it startled me. For years, my work had been background noise to Matt's latest scramble. Now she was asking, not with the glowing enthusiasm she gave him, but with effort. Her voice wavered like she was speaking a foreign language. "It's good," I said slowly. "Busy. I'm leading a new campaign for a nonprofit. It feels important." Her eyes softened, and for a moment, I thought she might actually say she was proud. She didn't. But she listened, really listened, and that in itself was new. Matt, predictably, resisted the hardest. He sulked through the airport, earbuds jammed in, shoulders hunched. When we landed, he tossed his bag into Richard's trunk with more force than necessary. As we drove home, he muttered just loud enough for me to hear, "Still can't believe you made such a big deal out of stupid tickets." I turned to him, calm now where before I might have snapped. "It wasn't about the tickets, Matt. And deep down, you know that." He rolled his eyes, but he didn't fire back. For Matt, silence was as close as he could come to concession. Back in Milwaukee, the patterns didn't dissolve overnight, but I noticed the small fractures. Richard called me a week later, not because something was wrong with the house or because he needed help with a bill, but just to talk. We chatted about the weather, about a local sports game. It was stilted, but it was something. Helen stopped peppering me with guilt-laden texts and started sending small check-ins instead, a photo of a new recipe she tried, a note asking if I wanted to meet for coffee. Sometimes I said yes, sometimes no, and she didn't push. That alone felt monumental. And Matt, well, Matt still complained, still demanded, still tried his old tactics. But I noticed he watched me now, warier, like he wasn't sure how far he could push. When he sniped, I didn't bite. When he mocked, I didn't flinch. My refusal to fold unsettled him in ways he didn't have words for. One Sunday dinner at their house, Helen passed me the serving spoon first before handing it to Matt. A tiny gesture, almost nothing. But I noticed. And so did he, his eyes narrowing, his mouth tightening, though he said nothing. The cracks were small, almost imperceptible. But they were there. Lying in bed one night, I thought back to the concert, to the kiss cam moment when the stadium had roared with laughter at a truth dragged suddenly into the open. That couple's private life had split wide in front of thousands, and while it had surely hurt, the world had gone on. People had laughed, the music had continued, the sky hadn't fallen. That was what boundaries felt like now. Uncomfortable, messy, exposing. But survivable. And maybe, just maybe, freeing. I knew my family might never fully change. Matt might never grow into accountability. Richard might never be fluent in apology. Helen might always want peace more than truth. But the cracks were there, and once you see them, you can't unsee them. And I knew this much, I wasn't going back to plaster over them. Months slipped by after Boston, not in a dramatic sweep but in the quiet rhythms of ordinary life. Winter gave way to the thaw of spring in Milwaukee, and with it came small but steady changes. I noticed them first not in my family, but in myself. The old patterns, the reflex to explain, to justify, to apologize before anyone even accused me, didn't vanish overnight. But each time I stopped myself, each time I let silence stand instead of rushing to fill it, I felt stronger. At work, I spoke up more in meetings, not just to defend my designs but to propose ideas I might once have kept tucked away. My manager noticed. "You're finding your voice," she said one afternoon, her smile tinged with surprise. The words warmed me more than I expected. Outside of work, I began taking small solo trips. A weekend in Door County, hiking trails that smelled of pine and earth. A day trip to Madison, wandering bookstores and drinking coffee alone without apology. Each time I packed my bag, I felt echoes of that night in Boston, the confetti in my hair, the music still vibrating in my chest, the steering wheel warm under my hands as I drove away from the city. Freedom, condensed into motion. My parents shifted in fits and starts. Richard called more often, not always with purpose, sometimes just to chat. The first time it happened, I braced instinctively for the ask, for a favor, a chore, a bailout. But none came. We talked about the Brewers, about the weather, about a home renovation project he was considering. It was small talk, but it was also new ground. Helen, too, tried. She still slipped into guilt sometimes, her voice softening to ask, "Could you come by?" It would mean a lot to Matt. But more often now, she asked about me. My projects at work. My travels. She even asked if I'd show her some of my sketches one afternoon, her eyes lingering on the pages like she was seeing me for the first time. And Matt remained Matt. He still tested boundaries, still tried to needle me into reacting. But when I didn't rise, when I let his barbs fall flat, he grew quieter. Not kinder, not yet, but less certain of his power. The old tactics no longer worked, and he knew it. That was its own kind of victory. The real difference, though, wasn't in them. It was in me. One Saturday in early summer, I drove north along the lake, windows down, the air alive with the scent of fresh grass and water. I stopped at a quiet overlook, climbed down to the rocks, and sat with my sketchbook balanced on my knees. The horizon stretched wide, and I thought of the Atlantic waves crashing against Cape Cod months earlier. I had whispered a vow to the sea that morning, "I'm not going back to the way it was." And I hadn't. I thought of Julia sometimes, her braid loose over her shoulder, her steady voice, "Boundaries only work if you keep them." I carried her words like a compass, something to steer by when old guilt tried to creep back in. She hadn't given me a map, just a direction. And that was enough. Back home, I tacked a photo from the Boston trip above my desk, not of my family, but of the concert. A stranger had snapped it for me, the stadium glowing neon, the stage exploding with color. In the photo, my face was tilted up, eyes bright, confetti caught in my hair. For once, I looked unburdened. Alive. Every time I glanced at it, I remembered, that night was mine. The tickets had been mine, the choice had been mine, the escape had been mine. And no one could take that away. I knew my family's change would never be perfect, maybe not even permanent. But I didn't need their approval anymore. I didn't need their validation to measure my worth. Because I had learned something far more valuable in Boston, I could say no. I could walk away. I could choose myself. And once you've learned that, once you've felt the power of keeping your own tickets in your hand, you don't go back. The road stretched ahead, open and unwritten. For the first time in my life, I wasn't following Matt's shadow, or my parents' script, or anyone else's path. I was driving my own. If this story connected with you, give it a like and hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And tell me in the comments, have you ever had to stand your ground with family? I'd love to read your stories.